Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Older Queer Voices. I'm Raga De Silva, your podcast host. Today, we'll talk about creative aging. But what is creative aging? Creative aging is an approach that recognizes the power of arts, storytelling, and creative activities to enrich later life, helping people express themselves, build connection, and challenge stereotypes about aging. It's not just about art for its own sake. It's about giving older adults meaningful ways to make sense of their experiences, strengthen well being, and reshape how we understand aging itself. We will talk more about this with our two incredible guests and voices in the LGBTQ plus aging research and advocacy space, Dr. Georgia Bowers, an ally and researcher, and Professor Andrew King, whose work focuses on aging and queer lives. Together, they lead the Lifehouse Project, an innovative initiative that uses theater and creative methods to support older queers in sharing their stories about housing and care services. Welcome, Professor Andrew King.
Hello, it's good to
Hello.
see you, Raga.
Good to have you on our podcast. And welcome to Dr. Georgia Bowers.
Hello.
Hey, Georgia, lovely to reconnect again and have you as a guest on a podcast. And we're going to have a great time because creative aging seems to be such an interesting topic. And I've been involved in your Lifehouse project. Thank you for that. And it is really fascinating. So let's start with you, Georgia. Can you please tell us a bit more about yourself, your background, what led you into this work, and why supporting older queer voices or older queer communities matters to you as an ally?
Well, first of all, thank you, Sophie and Andy, today, and we're really you. So, my as a theatre maker, what I mean by that is seeing theatre as storytelling to really the different issues that are happening in our society. And I trained at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. And whilst I was a student, I also worked in a care home as an activities coordinator. And that was the first time I had really encountered a wide community of older people. And in that space, as an activities coordinator, it was my job to programme and provide a series of meaningful activities, which at that time were things like bird watching and bingo, which all had fantastic value. But I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps I lived in this space, I might get a bit bored of bingo and the crossword. So, a long story short, I went to the care home manager and I asked if perhaps I could set up a small theatre company, just meet once a week and do some classic theatre games such as improvisation or character development. And really quickly, I could see the positive impact that the theatre activities were having, not just on the residents, but on their families, on the staff, and on the space as a whole, as it transitioned from being an environment where people were being cared for to now we were creating together because nobody in the space had ever done anything like theatre before. And so that really ignited my interest in creative aging and the power of theatre in later life. And then we fast forward to today, where I'm a lecturer and programme leader at the Guildford School of Acting, University of Surrey. And how I came to become really interested in working with LGBTQ plus older people is one of two ways. So about 10 years ago, when I was running a theatre group at London Bubble Theatre Company, I did a project in a sheltered housing unit in South London. And we had an older gentleman who'd come for about 3 or 4 sessions and he was really enjoying it. And at the end of one session, he said to me, Georgia, can I talk to you in private? And I thought, oh, what is it? And he shared with me that he was gay. He'd never told anybody before. And that he felt because he told me, he would no longer be able to come to the group and that he wouldn't be welcomed. And that was the first time I had encountered this high level of fear and pressure that he felt to conceal his true identity due to his sexual orientation. And I reassured him and, said, absolutely, that's not the case. Everybody is welcome here. And that was, that sort of planted the seed that I thought, there might be a real area of work that needs to happen here. And then fast forward 10 years later, I just started at Surrey and I was having a chat with Andy, who I'm sure can talk about his work in more detail in a moment. And Andy has a wealth of work in looking at housing provision with queer older people. And we were just chatting about my creative work with older adults and Andy's research. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to do a research project, but rather than perhaps doing more traditional research, data collection, such as interviews or questionnaires, let's see what happens if we create theatre in a particular space. And yeah, that's how we came to create the Lifehouse project.
Brilliant, brilliant. I have another question to you. When you said that you saw there was a positive impact, on the communities that you were working with at that time, can you just tell us what does that mean? What does positive impact mean? What do people actually get to see, which is different?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the benefits of engaging with theatre in later life are so vast, but in that particular instance, I think one of the biggest changes I witnessed is that the status of older people shifted in the care home. So I think because nobody in that space, whether that be staff, family, or residents, had done anything in theatre before, that created a level playing field. So everybody came to the workshop thinking, oh, what's this all about? And that transitioned the older residents from being somebody where perhaps care was poured into them. So there was a carer or a loved one doing something for them, and actually they were working together on a level. So it rebalanced things in that 45 minutes, which was really powerful. I think also it shifted the residents from being what might be perceived as being passive engagement. So, for example, people would come into the communal lounge, be sat in a particular seat or in a space, and they may be spoken at. So, for example, reading the newspaper, reading an article. Whereas with theatre and the way that I work creative with older people is they are very much my collaborators, they're my co-artists. So rather than me coming and saying, right, this is what we are going to do, it was, okay, let's explore these box of props. What do they make you think of? Who do you think might wear this? And slowly a character emerges. So it was going from being docile to being very active, which is really important. And then I think there were the health outcomes. So, for example, there were reduced levels of stress and anxiety. And I remember individuals living with dementia would come in with their fists very clenched tightly like this because they were feeling high levels of anxiety. And then within 15 to 20 minutes, you could see the hands relax and the tension release. So you have those positive health outcomes as well, and also just the joy that was happening in the space and laughter and being together and socialising and developing a community, which I think in care settings can be really difficult because sometimes people can spend a lot of time in their rooms on their own.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating, Georgia. Thank you for doing this and also for talking about it. Because for me, like I said, I've been involved in your project and I love the word collaborative. Because as you get older, as you age, people dismiss you for various reasons. You become invisible. I haven't reached there yet, but I can sense that happening to me as well. But participating in something where your words, your thoughts, your feedback is appreciated, valued, and then you become a part of the creation. I think it's brilliant. It's brilliant, not just for your cognitive skills, but also for overall confidence. So I think it's an amazing project. And Dr. Andrew King, I will come to you next. Can you, I mean, I read about you quite a bit and we've had the pleasure of meeting earlier. I'm just fascinated by your journey as well. What is it as a gay man? What has your journey been about? And both personally and professionally, of course, and what got you into this particular space as well?
Well, for me, it really started. I mean, I'll go back to about 2008. So about 18 years ago, I had just finished my PhD. I did everything later in my life. I didn't go to university till I was 31. I kind of struggled with coming out when I was in my late teens and early 20s. Anyway, I finished my PhD and in 2008 I got involved in a project in East London. So it all started for me since in East London, doing a project about LGBT people over the age of 50 and their experiences of living or working in East London. And it was a really interesting project. I'd done previous research around sexual orientation before, but not with older people. And And really, first of all, their stories were really interesting and sort of insightful, but also we did a follow-on project to kind of share what we'd learned with policymakers and service providers in East London and the wider London area, and how they might be able to use that sort of knowledge to improve their services, to make them more LGBT inclusive. And I think what I really learned from that was that quite often service providers want to make their services more inclusive, but they don't really know where to start. They are quite concerned about doing the wrong thing. It's not necessarily outright discrimination, but it leads, you mentioned visibility, Raga. I think that's important as well. They just, even if they're aware of LGBT people, they don't think that that applies to older people. And so older LGBT people become invisible. And so that really was the start of it for me. And then I went on to lead another project that was looking in gaps in knowledge around LGBT aging. And one of the workshops that we ran, one of the areas that there was a gap in knowledge was around housing. And that was really, so about sort of 8 years later, 2016, 17, I started to get involved in research about older LGBT people's experience of housing and housing with care. We did a study at Surrey. It was called the Safe Housing Project, and that was about older LGBT people's housing experiences, preferences, and what they wanted in the future. Aware that there wasn't an awful lot of choice, and there were also some awful stories as well that have been highlighted through the research. And so we did that study, and just to give you a sort of an indication of some things we found that most people felt generally safe in their own home, but they were worried that was going to change as they got older. They felt that because they might need to use more services, people would come into their home, they might be discriminated against. People started to become hyper vigilant around their home and in their local area in ways that they might not have experienced for quite a number of years. It almost like felt like a sort of going back to earlier in their lives when they'd experienced much more discrimination and prejudice. And so there was a real concern that people were going to experience that again. People worried about health professionals coming into their home, and some people, went as far as to sort of change their home environment, putting photos away, putting DVDs, posters, flags, things like that, to hide any kind of clues about their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so that led on really to all the sort of housing research I've done since. Most of it was using standard sort of methods of social science like surveys and interviews, until I met Georgia, which I'll talk about in a moment. But in terms of my own identity, you said as a gay man, what's my experience? Well, certainly I've been concerned at various points in my life about, who might come to my home, and whether I'm going to be discriminated against in some way. There's always that sort of sense of checking, risk assessing, is this going to be okay? Am I going to experience any discrimination? Do I need to do something about it? That kind of thing. And also, I was very aware from the earlier aging research about people beginning to feel that they couldn't sort of fight their corner necessarily in the way that they had in the past. And that might make them feel that they might experience another level of discrimination. So I'd worked with various organisations. Stonewall Housing is the UK's oldest LGBT housing support charity. Tonic Housing as well, who set up the UK's very first LGBT affirmative retirement community, and Opening Doors London when they were operating. And we did the Building Safe Choices research in 2020 and have continued working with Stonewall Housing and Tonic since. And then, sort of hearing about Georgia's work, meeting Georgia, being inspired by Georgia to think about creative aging methods. And as soon as we got talking, I thought I could really see how this might work. And so it's been a pleasure to be part of the Lifehouse project and work with Georgia and our other colleague, Richard Green and Francis Sanders on this.
It's brilliant. I mean, when you were talking about, there were so many layers coming out. I'm thinking fear, discrimination, de-gaying, and interestingly, all my conversations with other people who are from our community and older, they talk about these things even now. And you would want to believe at least that this was happening many years ago. People have fought for this, but it's still happening now in 2026. It is shocking. And what I'm fascinated. May I call you Andy? Is that all right?
Yeah,
Call you
that's
Andy?
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinated that your journey has somehow intersected with a journey with an ally from a community who's much younger. And for me, that's what I talk about quite a bit as well, intergenerational conversations where the younger person, doesn't matter whether they're from the community or not, people who are empathetic towards us, understand who we are, and then you come together and you share your wisdom experiences. Can I ask you on that note, how does it make you feel? Do you feel that you're working with an ally, or do you feel that it's just part of the same, universe ecosystem?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Georgia's fantastic to work with, and very open to wanting to hear about people's experiences and to sort of understand them as well. I found that, as Georgia was saying, using theatre and kind of as a way to facilitate and collaborate and enable people to tell their stories, even though they might be different to your own story. There's something very powerful in that generally. And I think for people from communities who are marginalized or discriminated in some way, that's really powerful as well. To have your story heard is a really powerful thing.
True. And Georgia, to you, talking about allyship, talking about queer space, which is quite different, right? We always talk about experience, that you need to be it to live it. You need to live it, sorry, to be it. And this is a common phrase amongst us. But you are not from the community, and still you do so much for the community. I just want to understand, when you do this kind of theater storytelling format, do you see a difference between the queer community and the non-queer community?
I think that's a really good question, and I think when I reflect back on that, what's really important to recognise is intersectionality as as a really widely recognised concept. So for anybody who's listening to this and might not be familiar, intersectionality being a term that was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a very prominent scholar in critical race theory. And so it's this idea that, identities are very rich, but they're mixed. And a person can have a number of protected characteristics that can also create multiple encounters of prejudice. So, for example, when I'm working, prior to the Lifehouse project, I was the lead artist and researcher for a project called the Chatter Project, which was a theatre group at the Chichester Festival Theatre. And that group was with older adults aged over 65 who lived in West Sussex and had full mental capacity. Now, the demographic that engaged with that work tended to be white British, able-bodied, heterosexual, and were predominantly working to middle class. So when I was working on that project and study, the common denominator was this feeling of ageism. But what was different in the Lifehouse project, and this is where I think intersectionality really comes into play, is yes, there were conversations of ageism, but then there were also conversations around the intersection between race, ageism, and sexual orientation, and then race, ageism, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Because I think it's also really important to recognise that the Lifehouse project isn't just about sexual orientation, but it is also about gender identity. And so that is unique to the Lifehouse project. And so I think when I compare it to the Chatter project at the Chichester Festival Theatre, those participants were concerned about how being visibly older, how that would impact the way that they're navigating the world, and that people would treat them differently because wrinkles and grey hair and perhaps a walking age triggers ageist attitudes. Whereas the Lifehouse project, it's yes, that people are worrying about ageism and age-based prejudice, and they're worried about discrimination because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And they're worrying about housing and key workers that are coming in who perhaps are homophobic or transphobic. So I think the experience of aging becomes layered in that sense.
Do you see a shift though in the way, if you're doing, say, a theater with a group of queer people and you have, say, let's say, I'm just going to give an example of a care worker coming from from a country that has homophobia, is personally homophobic, maybe not even homophobic, it's just ignorant, not aware, as Andy said earlier. Sometimes it's just about not knowing something. But do you see a shift in their attitude towards the people around, the queer people?
Yes, we do. So in the Lifehouse project, what we did as part of the most recent iteration of it is, as you know, Raga, we co-created an animation, and this animation outlines what are the care and housing concerns of the queer older community. What are the issues that they're encountering, but also what are the solutions and strategies that professionals working in care and housing can employ to try and make it more LGBTQ plus inclusive. And I'm really, really thrilled to share that we have had really positive feedback from the staff that watched that animation as part of ongoing EDI training. So we applied the animation as part of staff training in one at-home care provider and at one housing provider. And we're just publishing a report which will have all of the official statistics on it, which we'd love to share with you and anybody watching. But I can say, we've had very high figures, well into the 90% region, or high 80%, with staff saying that they now ask for pronouns, for example. Or it could be that they now feel significantly more confident in providing care to queer older people. We also, as part of the study, carried out interviews with senior management. And one of the quotes is from a manager saying, as part of the Lifehouse project, we've now put pronouns on all staff passes. Now, that may seem like a really small thing to some people, but actually, I would argue that that's a really significant shift, because it's also acknowledging that pronouns are a thing, they do exist, and they're very important. And there's a tremendous value in asking somebody what their pronoun is and showing that these are my pronouns as well. I think it creates almost like a permission, that this is part of the culture in this space, that we recognise that gender is fluid, and that it's important to ask what pronouns are. So yes, I think powerful shifts can happen through theatre, through storytelling, and ultimately through characters that share real and lived experiences and create empathy from a community who perhaps that's not necessarily their lived experience, but they can see this story playing out and they can become invested in it. And I think through that investment is when we get change happening.
And that's brilliant. That's actually what I was going to say. It's an investment, and it's the collaboration of two minds, 100 minds together, and that is when change happens. And the fact that you're saying that you can see it happening, you have tangible results, I think that's brilliant, Georgia. Congratulations. And Andy, I was just going to come back to you on creative aging. I know I started my podcast talking about creative aging. Georgia has talked about it a bit, but I just want to know, when you use creative aging and you use theater-based storytelling, how can you compare it to other forms of storytelling, writing, for instance, podcast like what we're doing now, traditional interviews that we do? It could be anything. It could be films, So what does it unlock emotionally or socially that those methods that you're talking about might not?
Yeah, I think for me, as somebody who has come to this not as a sort of theatre practitioner, and is more familiar with the other kinds of methods of storytelling in a way, like interviews and focus groups and things like that. I think there's something. First of all, there's something very creative about it, in the sense that people can choose the way in which they create those characters, and they can put some of themselves into it without having to say, this is my story. This might be very relevant to them, but they might not want to share that, but they can put that into a character they're developing. So I think that's one thing. I think also there's something very social about it as well. I mean, the closest you'd probably get with other forms is a focus group, but focus groups can be quite formal, and there's something very creative and enjoyable and playful about it as well. And I think that's really important. Watching the people that were participating in the first round of workshops that Georgia led for the Lifehouse project, people were just enjoying it as well as telling stories. And they were laughing together, they were sort of crying together as well. So there's something really dynamic there and important. And I think this is important in a lot of things that are written about older LGBT people are often very sort of negative or very sort of tragic and things like that. And there are those things, but there's also a great deal of joy and celebration as well. And I think that comes out in those contexts as well, that in a way that sitting and doing an interview, it might not really be quite the same as well, even though I think ultimately they're both getting at stories, experiences, and why those things are important.
Yeah, it's wonderful because, when I was part of the project, I can speak for myself. I remember coming back home after the workshopping and thinking, actually, I'm not the only person who's been through it. There are others who've had similar experiences, because a lot of us think in silos. We think something happens, good or bad, it's only happening to us, or maybe it's not happening
Yeah.
to somebody else to that extent. And when I remember this workshopping, Georgia, and I was thinking to myself, gosh, do I even want to talk about this? Like, you hesitate to tell your story in front of strangers, but the way the workshopping was managed, you just want to talk about it because somebody else has shared, and you say, actually, this has happened with me as well. And so I find that for me personally, this form of storytelling, the theater form of storytelling, even if you're not an actor, or if you've not ever had experience with doing theater, is very powerful. I think it's one of the most powerful forms of storytelling, although I don't say writing isn't or film isn't, but it is a very powerful form. And Georgie, I'm going to come back to you on this. When you unpack, let's say, because I'm assuming when you do theater, you're bringing in people and you want what's in their head, what's in their heart to come out, right? So when you unpack something like that, do you ever find any level of frustration and you wish that there would be more to this? Is there any kind of frustration that happens during this process?
I think just listening to you then, this idea of being more to this, I think I wish that there was more funding so that we could go longer. I think so often, funds are so incredibly tight, across the UK, across all funding bodies. And and it means that we can only work with this fantastic community for a very limited amount of time. So in our pilot project of the Lifehouse project, we worked with the community up to 6 times, and then I think we did about 6 workshops in the second iteration of the Lifehouse project, and 90 minutes to 2 hour workshops isn't really a long time. I think what we've covered and achieved in those 6 workshops is fantastic. And I think that's testimony, not just to the artistic skills and the research and the team that's involved, but also to the amazing participants and their willingness. But I do often think, well, imagine if we got funded for a year, and imagine if we had 52 workshops. So one happened every week, the depth of the research that we would get, but also the depth of the impact, which I think is so, so important. And creative aging is a field in the UK that's been going for many years, but in many ways it's still in its infancy. And there are exciting projects happening up and down the UK and around the world. But I do think that projects like the Lifehouse project that specifically works with older LGBTQ plus people are quite scarce. And I would love to see more investment in projects like the Lifehouse project, because what we're doing is it's not just a theatre group. There is great value in just going to a theatre group and having fun, enormous value. But we're making theatre, we're developing stories, we're having fun, and we're being political. The Lifehouse project is a mode of activism. We are here to create change, and we are creating change with a community who have a lifelong experience of being activists, who have been fighting for their rights all of their adult life. And I think that's what makes the Lifehouse project so unique. So I do get frustrated that, we've done amazing work, but I'd love to do more of it, and I'd love to do it over a longer period of time, because I think it would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think funding seems to be the limiting factor for all of us, right? I mean, I'd love to see this. In fact, what you're doing is quite similar to what we are doing. We typically on our podcast, we bring in activists. We want people who have fought for change to share their stories before either we are erased or we are forgotten. And yeah, and storytelling in whatever form we can, bring those stories together. Let more and more people look at us, and understand that this is it. This is who we are, and we have to be who we are. Otherwise, what's the point? And should we, Andy, come to you and talk to you about, do you co-design training resources for housing and care? And I just give us a little bit of context on what that means and who uses them.
Yeah.
And do you sometimes meet professionals and you say that, okay, this is what you've learned all your life. I wish now you could unlearn this. Is that also one of the outcomes that you expect?
So I think I've done a lot of sort of designing resources over the years, and one of the things that has always been really important to me and the people that I've worked with, and George is a good example of this, is that it's not just about research, it's about research to create change. And that's really important, because research without change, really, it's important, yes, but it needs to go further, I always think. So over the years, I've designed various resources related to housing and care provision, but particularly around housing. But I think it's important to point out that when I've been involved in that, and I'm not just talking about the Lifehouse project here, it's always been with LGBTQ plus community members and other key partners, often LGBTQ plus community organisations, in sort of collaborative ways, in ways in which we co-design the resources together, and then we actively sort of implement them together as well. So for example, I worked with Stonewall Housing and Houseproud to create the UK's first equality framework for LGBTQ plus social housing residents. That came out of some research that we did in 2018. That's now the largest scheme of its kind, in fact, the only scheme of its kind in the UK. It's over 80 social housing organisations signed up to it, and it is very much about putting LGBTQ social housing residents' voices to the fore and making sure that housing providers work together with their residents to find solutions to issues that they identify. Similarly, with the Lifehouse project, as you know, Georgia said, it was driven by LGBTQ community members, and particularly the animation that was created was very much co-designed. And I think that's important because, first of all, you know, the phrase, you know, nothing about us without us, that's really important as well. And people bring their experiences and their life histories, really, and all their skills to creating those resources as well. But also, I think when they're translated into organizations, they have a sort of a validity and a power about them, that things that have, you know, if I'd have just sat here and just knocked something out in an hour, it's not going to have the same degree of authenticity about it that something co-designed is going to have. And I mean, one of the reasons we created the animation for the Lifehouse project is because we wanted something that was quite portable, that could be used in training. And also it was something where people could watch the animation and then talk in their staff group about it in what for them might be quite a safe space, and how it made them feel, and all of that as well. And George has already talked about the fantastic evaluations we've had by staff, but being able to do that and incorporate something like that into wider training, I know is really important for organisations, because that's what they've told me over a long period of time as well.
Excellent. I like that you said that research to create change. You don't do research for the sake of research,
Mm-hmm.
because research does have a reputation, right? Research can sound, oh, it's boring. Another research report. You know, we have all those things that we say, but when you say that you're doing it to create change, and you can see that change actually happening, I think it's very validating for a lot of us. And thank you for that. And George, I'm going to come back to you as I'm going to talk about something which is my favorite subject, which is care homes. And I know that you, like you said, 10 years ago, you started off in care homes. And there are horrible stories of abuse in care homes, especially towards the queer community, towards the LGBTQ plus community. So is there something that you feel that there is a role that creative aging can play in care homes?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think, it's twofold. I think creative aging can be embedded into care homes in terms of being part of the provision that is there for older adults. So, under the CQC, which is the the Care Quality Commissioning group, all care homes must have some form of activities. And often those activities are, like I was saying, they have value, but bird watching, the crossword, bingo, if you're doing that every day of every week, that can become quite tedious and boring. And like I was saying, being quite passive. So I think having creative aging, and it doesn't just have to be theatre, creative aging can be pottery, it can be poetry, it can be music, it can be dance, it could be, street art, it could be anything that's creative, has a real value and place in these settings. And there's something about, if we look at the United Nations human rights, access to creativity is part of that. it is a human right. And I think that gets forgotten. And I think there's something about being creative, which is inherently human. We as humans have been sharing stories and telling stories since the dawn of time, whether that's been round a campfire or we've been drawing on the walls of a cave. It's in our biology. It's like we're programmed to connect via storytelling. So I think, we as a society, we are focusing on creativity for children and young people, and it should be from the cradle to the grave, creativity, a pipeline all the way through. So I think in that sense it's important, but also I think creative aging as a mechanism for training. I've worked in many care homes in the UK now, and I remember when I first began and was a core member of staff, we had to do lots of training, which is very important. But so often it would be really boring, because you'd either have someone just at the front talking to you, little bit like a school teacher, or it would be online and it would be these very passive videos and multiple choice questions. And I think, again, drawing on theatre and that foundation of storytelling, it is more engaging. It creates as a community, because in the Lifehouse project, the animation, it wasn't just a case of right, sit and watch it and then fill in a questionnaire. It was right, first of all, we're going to discuss the themes of today in this session, which in this case was LGBTQ plus inclusive care. Now we're going to watch the animation. Now we're going to unpick each character. What is this person facing? How can we support them? So it was very interactive. The animation is a springboard for conversation and for interrogation. And I think that is far more engaging and therefore impactful than just, okay, I'm going to sit here on my own in a room and do some multiple choice questions. And, I always say to people that Picasso's Guernica, or if we look at Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List, that portrays a very important historical moment and learning in humanity in a way that, a traditional academic paper or a blog post or a questionnaire just couldn't. The storytelling evokes something in us. We as viewers and as witnesses of that story become invested in it. And I think that's what creative aging can do. So it shouldn't be underestimated as a mechanism for change.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, but there is a lot of ageism, like you said, even whether it's social housing or when organizations invite you into their space and talk about creative aging. What do they do typically? They will give you, like you said, bingo,
Hmm.
that's one thing. Or they will, like, I mean, I've experienced this myself, jewelry making, knitting. I'm not saying they're bad, but we have to go beyond that.
Yeah.
I somehow they picture every older person as this person
Mhm.
sitting on the couch and, with things coming out of their mouth, and they have to do. So we have to work towards creating, communities where people are treated for who they are, not because what you think they are, your version or your
Absolutely.
impression of what a 70, 80-year-old is or
Mhm.
50-year-old is. And that is why I loved the idea of theater, because I mean, the experience with tonic housing, since Andy talked about it earlier, you referred to tonic. The experience here was fantastic because there was something that the older people were doing, which was not a caricature. It was not
Mhm.
stereotype. It was not, they were not boxed into saying old people just go and sit in the corner and play your bingo. They were treated like humans, like smart, intelligent humans that most people are. And I think this is the most important part of creative aging. When I was researching for a talk, I thought, this is amazing. Why are we not talking about this for a community?
Yeah.
Why are we not getting more funding for people like you? Why are we not taking this into corporate collaborations, for instance? Organizations can
Mhm.
easily do this for their ERGs and the LGBTQ networks and the allyship. What a brilliant thing it can happen that every June within your organization, 8, 10 weeks of workshops, and here you have something to put forward, and I really believe this will bring in change more than just having panel discussions, which I love, which I host quite a bit. But everything matters, everything works, everything helps. And yeah, I'm going to come to you, and I know we are running short of time now, but what next after the Lifehouse project for both of you? And is there anything interesting? I know everything is interesting, but any one interesting thing that you're doing that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I mean, we really want to scale up what we've done, and put it on a broader canvas, really, and more organisations, but also look at ways that we can extend the sort of resources that we're working to create as well. So I think that's one thing that we would definitely like to do from this. It's just about, well, time, money, all the usual things, but certainly that was something that we're really exploring as well. And I think, you know, that we had a fantastic response to the animation. It was shown at the National Film Theatre as part of the London Bubble celebrations there last summer. I think it could go further as well, and that would be really great. And yeah, I'd personally would really like to do, because I'm aware of other projects in other countries that maybe aren't using theatre in quite the way that we have, but certainly that are researching and trying to create change around LGBTQ plus aging, like we are. And I think trying to do that on a much more international scale and working together would be really great as well.
Brilliant. I know that in India, in the corporate space, they have these little theater groups, small little four, five, six people who perform, queer-related stories, and then they take them into organizations. During
Yeah,
Pride, they're always in high demand. So I
yeah.
mean, I think it's really powerful. I'm just going to ask you a very personal question, Andy, because when we
Mm,
started, you talked about that you came out late in life. You said that before you started. Has the
mm.
kind of work that you're doing now, has that had an impact on your own personal life as you grow older?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I ask myself, what's my later life going to be like, as well. You know, I'm in my late 50s now, and you know, I think about what's that going to be like? How is that going to be different from some of the people that I spoke to in 2008, when they were in their you know, they were my age now then. So I think there'll be generational differences as well. And yeah, I mean, doing this work really has been personally has been very empowering, and something that I'm really, yeah, there's so many parts of my job that I love, but doing this kind of work is right up there amongst the top things to do, because it does feel that we are doing things that are making a difference, and that's important to me.
Yeah, and making a difference to you as well as the
Yeah,
others, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
that's also
Yeah.
important. And before I move on to Georgia with the last question, I want to understand, the word you've been saying LGBTQ plus, and I've kept on saying queer because I'm trying to own that word based on the
Mm.
past historic, uh, you know, statement around it. I just want to know, what do you think of the word queer? Andy, sorry, it was to you.
So,
Yeah, sorry,
so,
my
yeah,
bad.
that's right. So I think in relation to older LGBTQ plus people, I very much sort of agree with what you were saying about, in a sense, owning the word and turning it into a word of empowerment and pride. But I also know from a lot of people that I've interviewed and spoken to, they just find that they don't want to use it. And so I tend to always ask people, older LGBTQ plus people, if when I'm with them, if that is a word that we can use, or they would prefer not to use as well. But the actual sort of trying to change the meaning of a word, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah, I'm just trying to reclaim it and see, because
Mm,
we've got really positive response, and there have been one or two where they have said, "Oh, this doesn't sit right with me," and I understand we've all been there, but
yeah,
I think sometimes we have to create negative into positive so that we can
yeah.
go ahead with our lives.
And I think the context is really important.
Yeah,
If somebody I don't know comes up and says, "Oh, Andy, you old queer," yeah, that I might not react in the same way that if it's somebody I know or they're using it in particular context as well. So I think context is always really important with language.
I agree with you. Context and intentionality, right?
Yeah,
The way it is said to you, the tone in which it has said to
yeah.
you. And on that note, Georgie, I'm going to come back to you with a final question. I heard that you have just written a book. I want to know more about that. And I also want to know what next for you from here after the Lifehouse Project. And I know you'll continue with the Lifehouse Project, but anything new for us to know about? And tell us more about your book.
Yeah, so I'm currently writing it as we speak. So it's called Aging on Stage, Theatre and Creative Aging. It's going to be published with Routledge, and I am due to submit the manuscript in September of this year. So hopefully it will be out soon after that. And essentially, it is looking at the role that creative aging and in particular theatre can play in challenging ageism and also mitigating the impact of ageist encounters. Because as I mentioned earlier, this research stems from the Chatter Project, where I was the lead artist and researcher in partnership with the Chichester Festival Theatre and the University of Portsmouth. And in that study, what I learned is that ageism is all around us. That wasn't the discovery. The discovery was that encounters with ageism creates feelings of shame. So I'm no good, I'm ugly because I've got grey hair, or I need to hide these wrinkles. Whereas when older adults regularly participated in theatre workshops, just like we've done in the Lifehouse Project, that created shame resilience. So ultimately, feelings of shame were decreased and feelings of pride were increased. And so the book is looking at, the history of creative aging and the power of creative aging in not just challenging age stereotypes, but in creating shame resilience. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to releasing that in due course. And I would obviously love to continue the Lifehouse project. Like Andy said, we want to expand it. We'd love to go international with this work. So if there's anybody listening to this interview, please do get in touch. And something that I've also said to Andy is I'm really interested in exploring ageism and some form of pro-aging / anti-ageism training, because again, I think we're looking in care and housing settings. I think there is a huge body of staff that are very well meaning and are passionate about the work they do, and majoritively are really good at what they do. But because we are all living in an ageist landscape, on a subconscious on a subconscious level, ageism seeps into our psyche, and often it operates in ways that we don't realise. So a classic example is elders speak. So that's speaking to an older person as if they're a child or a baby, and it could be something like, "Oh, hello, sweetie. You okay there, dear?" Now, I wouldn't, speak to Andy like that. So why would I speak to somebody who's 92 like that? So I think that's a really big area of work that I want to explore more, is again, how can we use theatre, how can we use storytelling and creativity as a training tool to begin to not only just unpick prejudice for the LGBTQ plus community, but also around ageism and age being a protected characteristic.
Thank you, Georgia. That was really powerful because just yesterday, about 5 times when I went out to the shops, they said, "Hello, darling, hello, love." Like, and the way they say it's so patronizing, and they just half bend towards you like you are a really old person and you can't understand anything. And when I ask for ways to places, they will give me in sign language. You go there, straight there, then take a right. There will be a house around, like all those things that they do, just as they think is a stereotype of aging. So I'm so glad you have these conversations that will be ongoing and also put into a book, which I'm sure we will love to read, and our readers, our listeners will love as well. On this note, I have to end this very fantastic conversation. A huge thank you to you, Dr. Georgia Bowers and Professor Andrew King, for joining us today and for sharing the incredible work behind the Lifehouse Project. Your insights reminds us that storytelling is not just about recording experiences, it's about creating understanding, empathy, and change. I love that bit the most, that it creates change. So if you're part of the LGBTQ community or work in housing and care, take a moment to reflect on how stories like these can inform your practice and support older queer people to live openly, safely, and authentically. Please make sure that you get in touch with Dr. Georgia Bowers and Andrew King. And if you need them, can you just quickly tell us, Georgia, what's your email? And
Yes.
Andy, what's yours?
So mine is g.bowers, that's BOWERS, at gsa.surrey.ac.uk.
And Andy, you?
Mine is andrew.king@surrey.ac.uk.
Good, that's easy. We'll put that in the caption as well for those listening. Thank you for listening, and remember to keep the conversations going because every story matters and change begins when we truly listen. Thank you also to our partners, GFW Clothing, Outspoken Speakers, Out and Wild, Ageism is Never in Style, and Proud HR. And to our listeners, we welcome your feedback, comments, and nominations. Please write to us at theviewsroom@gmail.com. Thank you again and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye for now.